Dr. Burgess of Texas for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wish we'd had Dr. Dean and Dr. Hogue at the Office of Attending Physician a few years ago. We had a microcosm here, if you will, in the United States Capitol. The House of Representatives was required to mask before we could go into the Capitol and sit on the floor masked. And the United States Senate was not. Well, wait a minute, COVID, what's the population is more likely to be stricken by COVID? It's the older individuals, which, I don't want to cast aspersions on the United States Senate, but they are generally older than your average House person. So what was magical about the rotunda that made the virus, it took away all its potency by going from the House to the Senate? It made no sense. And the population, people saw this, and that's what was so frustrating over and over again. Look, I want to share with you in 2005, during the first bird flu, my first term on this committee, I was asked to go to Geneva and visit the World Health Organization, which I did. And my takeaway from that visit at the World Health Organization, that if it was not for the CDC, the World Health Organization would not be worth anything. It was the embedded people from the CDC at the World Health Organization that gave it its value. That's why it's particularly painful to be here today, recognizing the CDC has lost all kinds of credibility. It's not, Mr. Pallone, it's not us fighting that caused them to lose their credibility. It was them not having the simple humility to come before the American people and say, we've never seen this before. This is what we think today. And you know what? We told you last week something that was a little different. We've learned something along the way. They would not do that. And that was just, it just decimated any credibility that people had, that the CDC might have had with the American people. Now look, in 2016, there was a Zika crisis, and the Zika crisis was going to affect the Olympics. And the CDC badly mishandled the testing then. I've got an article, Mr. Chairman, from the Washington Post. I'm going to ask unanimous consent to put it into the record after I finish. But this article talks about how the CDC sidelined an effective laboratory test, and the test that the CDC recommended be used failed about a third of the time, and there was a more reliable test. Look, we had all kinds of young people, athletes, going down to Brazil during the height of Zika. These are the people who would be at risk for the sequelae of a Zika infection. And unfortunately, the CDC was way behind on this on the testing. Why is that important? Because in February of 2020, the CDC badly mishandled the test for the coronavirus, for COVID-19. And we were a month behind. The United States was a month behind countries like South Korea and Japan that had the laboratory-developed test that was necessary to detect. I mean, measles is a problem. I agree with you, and I'm so grateful you brought that to the committee's attention. You got 4 days of infectivity that is in the community before you realize it was there. COVID-19, it was 2 weeks, we think. We don't really even know. But that period of infectivity after exposure, 2 weeks, and we were a month behind in getting a reliable test. I spoke to Dr. Burke several times during the COVID problem, and I got to tell you, one of my great frustrations, we knew we had a problem with testing after we finally got the testing up and running a month late. Then we just didn't have enough. And the president would go on television, or the vice president would say, everyone who wants a test is going to get a test. And LabCorp would say, how? But we all knew that people wanted testing. We actually had a lot of testing capacity that was probably paid for by NIH grants that sat in hospitals and research labs across the country, and it was on the sidelines and wasn't used. So, Ms. Dean, let me ask you, does the CDC currently have the authority to tap into that network of hospital and research lab equipment to use it at a time of a national crisis? Dr. Dean, actually, you're the one who's probably had the most experience with this.
I'm not able to comment on the current authorities the CDC has, what they can or can't do regarding laboratory testing. But I will share that in California, I was a co-chair of the testing task force in March, and we had to stand it up fast to solve that problem. And it was remarkable to see the private sector voluntarily participate. Machines, humans, everyone was in it together, public-private, and that's what I saw work.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I see my time's expired. I've got a number of other questions I'll submit for the record and look forward to your written responses. Thank you.
Thank the gentleman.